Today we jump into our Summer of Soul Magic, and you may know Elizabeth Gilbert best by her huge novel and subsequent movie, Eat, Pray, Love. That's who Elizabeth Gilbert is. That was an autobiographical novel and movie, and we're going to actually watch that movie later this summer as a group to kind of get to know our muse a little bit more. But today we're diving into her book, Big Magic, Living Creatively Beyond Fear, and we're going to spend the next 6 weeks doing that, and Randy read a little bit of the Courage chapter today. So last week I previewed those 6 sections of the book, and we're going to focus on one section every week for the next 6 lessons. Today, the first section is about courage. So I want to start my talk today with a quote by Elizabeth Gilbert, but it's not from Big Magic, it's from another book that she wrote, but she says this: "Life is both fleeting and dangerous, and there is no point in denying yourself pleasure or being anything other than what you are." Secrets and all, right? Right? So how many of you find yourself denying yourself pleasure and being a lot of what you are not? Oh, good. I see some hands. So, because I think we do that because of the first 2 parts of the quote. Life is dangerous and fleeting. And those 2 words have us doing lots of things that deny ourselves pleasure and make us be something that we're not. So it takes quite a bit of courage to seek a pleasurable life for yourself, and a whole ton of courage to be exactly who and what you are. But that is what this summer is about. The other thing this summer is about living creatively. And I was listening to an interview that Elizabeth Gilbert did the other day. Actually, it was an old interview, but I was listening to it the other day. And she was talking about the reality that we are born creative. That one of the unique qualities about being a human being, part of this human species, is that we have a creative mind and we make things, right? She pointed out that there's almost no square inch of the planet that a human being has not taken and refashioned it, right? Almost not a square inch. Transformed it through creativity, taking one thing and making another thing out of it. Supposedly bettering it, you never know, but supposedly bettering it, but definitely changing one form into another. Right? It's who we're born to be. It's one of the qualities we have as human beings that no other species really has to the ability we do. But as we age, most of us begin to lose our sense of creativity, and we develop a fear of living creatively. If you give a pile of crayons to children, not one child will hold back. They all dive in, or they're going to make something, right? So why do we stop making our lives colorful? I'll paraphrase how she actually defined creativity. She said something like, creativity is doing anything more beautifully than is necessary for function. Doing anything more beautifully than is necessary for function. And it takes courage to do your life more beautifully than is necessary for it to function. And why is that? Why is that? You know, the other day I was talking to Terry and prepping for the talk, and I asked her if she thought herself courageous. No. If you know us, that took us down a long conversation. Because we talked a lot. Actually, I talked, she looked, anyway. But anyway, that's a conversation about courage and some of the courageous things that we have done. So we discovered that both of us reached immediately for a memory when we're talking about courage of a time in our lives when we decided, against everyone else's advice, to move ourselves away from everything familiar into the unknown. She moved from Indiana to Sarasota in her 20s, and I moved from Atlanta to Seattle in my 30s. But we both defined a courageous moment as big, big, big change, a chance for us to recreate our entire lives at one time. New friends, new jobs, new choices, create. That's what we were doing. So both of our stories involve tremendous life-altering changes. They involve breaking out of comfort zones and living structures and redefining ourselves. Huge, huge. But our stories are a bit rare because life does not often present us with opportunities for such wide sweeping changes, drastic change. even though those are going to come to mind when the two of us are asked about courage. But what about you? Can you think of some times in your life when you have proven to yourself you are courageous, right? But if I'm going to call myself courageous, I want to really find myself courageous on a daily basis. Not just every now and then when there's, something big to do. But I think it's those smaller daily courage moments that Elizabeth Gilbert writes about in her book, that ever-present courage it takes to live in a way that seeks and calls forth trust, calling forth our deepest self to burst through into life all the time. It takes courage to seek ways to make our lives more beautiful than functionally necessary. Courage. So I got to admit that when I discussed courage with Carrie, I started channeling my inner cowardly lion from The Wizard of Oz, and I started saying, courage. So she dared me to say it that way, but I'm not going to say it that way again. I got to say that word a lot today, so I'm not going to do it like the lion every time. But the entire Wizard of Oz movie is actually a beautiful spiritual lesson, and maybe I'll do that one day. But every character in that movie is an aspect of ourselves, including the cowardly lion, right? And just like we do, the lion declares himself a coward because he doesn't believe in himself. He chickens out of things because he doubts himself, right? And like many of us who are fearful, we come across as kind of bully because we're blustering to hide our fear about anything. But Dorothy can see through that, right? And she invites him into his strength and into his bravery. And by the end of the movie, he was making these courageous choices. But most of us need a Dorothy in our lives to invite us into our strength and courage. And quite frankly, we've got to summon our inner Dorothy a lot too. So what is your relationship with courage? I think the cowardly lion kind of illustrates that very typical relationship between courage and fear and courage. And that's a lack of belief in ourselves. We have moments when we just really believe in ourselves, and then we have moments when fear just tramples us down, right? And I think that relationship with courage and fear shows up daily in our lives. We've got to believe in ourselves. So what are the little things that require courage from us all the time? I think we're summoning courage every time we make a new choice or a decision to get out of the routines of our beaten path every day. Because without bravery or courage, we tend to keep our lives pretty much the same. Pretty small, pretty predictable. That's where we tend to end up. And if you're like most people, this week looks a heck of a lot like last week, right? We tend to drive the same roads. We tend to shop at the same shops. We maintain pretty much the same wardrobe. We hang out with the same people. We go to the same places. And if we're honest, we also think the same thoughts. We make the same choices. We react the same way when we're faced with similar things. We're predictable, tried and true, and we're living lives where we've proven to ourselves that we can make it. We are functioning, right? And don't misunderstand. There's nothing wrong. There's nothing wrong with our habit of doing life this way. It's just that I think our souls tend to get a little bit weary of doing the same things all the time. Our souls get tired of the function of our lives, and they crave more creativity, more beauty. Gilbert's book is subtitled Creative Living Beyond Fear. Fear is what keeps us from living creatively. Creative living means we make new choices to have new and more beautiful experiences for ourselves. We create a new way to get to the same place, or maybe even creatively choose a different park to explore, or a new store, or a new restaurant. We creatively choose to dress in a different way. We think a new creative thought. Creative living beyond fear is actually living instead of just existing. And I'm not talking about fear like terror. I'm not talking about that kind of fear. I'm talking about fear like nervousness or anxiousness or uncertainty or playing it safe, staying in your comfort zone. Fear is worrying about what other people will think if you shift things up a bit. Fear is not wanting to rock the boat. Fear is about doubting our ability to do something new. Fear is about not being perfect. So if you're thinking and you're looking at this summer thing and you're like, we're talking about becoming a painter or a sculptor or a musician or an artist of some type. No. The creative living I'm talking about is giving yourself new experiences that delight you and stimulate you and thrill you and shift you in big and small ways. Gilbert talks about living life driven by curiosity instead of fear. That's the kind of creativity that we're all invited to do. We all have the talent to live, to follow our curiosity into new things. So the invitation is to live courageously, but it doesn't mean you're going to sell your home and quit your job and you get new friends and all of that. This summer actually will also not probably lead you to a Pulitzer Prize or a Tony or an Oscar or any of that. It's leading you to the prize of living your life out loud. Gilbert says this: while the paths and outcomes of creative living will vary wildly from person to person, I can guarantee you this: a creative life is an amplified life. It's a bigger life, a happier life, an expanded life, and a hell of a lot more interesting life. That's what we're going to be aiming for this summer. And one of my jobs as your minister is to be a Dorothy in your life. It's to be a Dorothy in your life. To have this unshakable faith in each and every one of you, because I am in relationship with your soul. Quite frankly, that's what the practitioners are trained to do too, and Reverend Beaver back there too. We're here to be Dorothys for you. Please don't call us Dorothy, but that's what we're to do for you. And we will often remind you your soul is connected to the power of the universe, and it can never disconnect from that. Your soul is brilliant. It is light. Your soul is capable of growing whatever seed you plant into it. Your soul can grow beyond any limitation you think is your identity. Your soul only knows possibility, and it yearns to express itself as love and light and joy, and your soul can be the spiritual leader of your life. It's so interesting when I'm working with people and they want to change something about their life. They want to do something creative. They often argue for their limitations. You know, if you're attached to your limitations, it's hard to stay in the presence of someone who sees only your light and refuses to agree with you on your limitations. Because if I bring the faith of God into our relationship with each other, I've got to know that your soul is powerful beyond your comprehension, creative beyond your wildest dreams, beautiful in every way. You're a perfect spiritual being. That's what I see. So sometimes when folks around me are challenged to look at their limitation, it makes them mad, right? It makes them uncomfortable. Sometimes it makes them scared. And sometimes folks need to take a break. They need to go away a little bit, and they quit counseling or coaching or coming here to spiritual teachings in this community because it gets intense being in the presence of so many people who see your light. But that's what makes our relationship a spiritual leader relationship. These teachings that you hear here remind you that you're strong enough to not quit making your life more beautiful. To remind you that this is a responsive universe, a loving universe that only wants the best for you. So fear is unnecessary. I teach you to encourage you to love yourself the most. And that includes loving the things that you create, such as the way you're in relationships, or the things you do in your world of work, or the gardening, or the friendshipping, or the music you choose, the things you love to eat. Whatever those secrets are, love those. Those are the things that make you you. All of it's just fine, just the way it is. Love yourself as you are right this second. And then the question becomes, given where you stand right now, can you make your life just a tiny bit more beautiful, more functioning, more fun, more loving, more tasty, more satisfying? Can you do that? These are the kinds of things that I want you to have the courage to do during the summer, yes, but for the rest of your life. We provide a community here that we talked about with our values that allows you to be around people who are also bettering their lives, who are also tweaking things and creating things and making better choices and thinking more powerful thoughts and planting more amazing seeds of possibility and watering them until they happen. This summer, we will stand witness to each other as we do those things. And here's my final word on limitations. Gilbert includes this in her book. It's not up there, Rebecca. Argue for your limitations, and you get to keep them. Argue for your limitations, and you get to keep them. And let me assure you that I'm not asking you to discard your fear. I'm not asking that. I'm insisting that you have a different relationship with your fear. Your fear is trying to keep you safe and protected and prevent you from being disappointed in yourself, right? But if you're going to live creatively, choosing these new things for yourself this summer and for the rest of your life, fear is coming along for what Elizabeth Gilbert calls the road trip, right? Fear is going with you, but it should not be making decisions in your life. It should not be driving your car on this road trip you're on. Because as I said last week, you're a human being, ego, self, and you're also a spiritual being, soul. And your human self is very fearful because it wants to defend your ego, right? The ego does not want to take risks. The ego does not want to be embarrassed. The ego does not want to be less than perfect. It wants to be beyond reproach. The ego sees everyone else as a competitor, and ego wants to come in first place or not participate at all, right? The ego wants to look good. The ego is afraid because if you go changing things about your routine and start getting creative and stuff, the ego will not be in control anymore. The ego will not be able to protect yourself if they can't predict everything that's going to happen. The ego has to be super prepared because it wants to be safe. The ego might look foolish if you start doing something different. But maybe it's time for your soul to have a summer to create and stretch its legs a little bit. The purpose of the soul is to experience everything it can on this human plane while it can in your magic suit. So let's show our soul a good time this summer and let it drive on this road trip we're on. So the big questions to ask your soul are questions like this. Where do you want to go? What are you curious about? What makes you feel alive? What activities make you forget time and space around you? What are you drawn to that's new and different? What do you know that your human ego self is afraid to know? What changes do you crave? Asking your soul these questions and then getting quiet enough to listen to the answers takes courage. So I want to tell you a little personal experience I have with living courageously. So a couple of years ago, my white stone word was reclamation. I wanted to reclaim my power of creating new things in my life. I wanted to find some more joy. My world was feeling kind of small, like most of our worlds were feeling kind of small a few years ago. And I absolutely wasn't living as creatively and joyfully as I could. So I asked my soul those questions. What do you want to do? What are you curious about? All of that. What do you need more of in your life? And I got some clear answers, and I want to talk about one of them today. The answer I got was dogs. Okay. So dogs are one of my things, and puppies in particular are one of my things. I can't remember my life without a dog. Little periods of time, but most of the time I've had a dog. And the first dog that I remember was when I was 4, was a black lab named Rexanne. Funny that I would make a full circle back to labs, right? Mm-hmm. So I had heard about Southeastern guide dogs a few years ago before the pandemic, but for various reasons I had never followed up on my initial curiosity about volunteering there. Mostly about the fear of making such a commitment. That's really what it was. I didn't know if I could make a commitment. But if I was going to move forward with this idea, I had to step into courage. I had to step into courage beyond my fears. I had to figure out how to apply as a volunteer. I had to figure out how could I go in there and tell them, I don't know anything about service dogs. I just like puppies. I don't know anything, but I'm willing to learn. And I don't know anything about it. And I had to go in and be willing to learn something new. I had to show up in a completely unfamiliar place and be willing to clean up puppy poop, which is not very fun, and take instructions from people that I didn't know. I had to be the new kid on the block. I had to wear a uniform. I haven't worn a uniform since I was like 22 years old, right? I had to be a beginner. I had to realize that I talked about commitment. I needed to be able to set boundaries and have the courage to say, no, I can only do this or I can only do that, and not be swallowed by something new. Can you relate to those fears? Those are real. They're real. And trust me, every one of those steps took the courage and belief in myself that I could figure it out. But I did them all, and y'all get to see my Thursday puppy pictures, right? Because I love it. It is such a joyful thing. I don't know why I love it, but I love it. It gives another layer of interesting. It's beauty beyond function. Trust me, that is not functioning, but it is fun and it is beautiful. And every Thursday morning, and sometimes in between, joy and more joy. And that's just one little bitty example of a choice to live courageously and step beyond my own limitations or my own ideas of what I couldn't do and uncertainty. I'm not talking about gigantic big changes. I'm talking about finding the creative ways of making your life look more like your life. We each have unique interests and experiences. Things that we stopped doing a long time ago or we were too afraid to ever try. What are those desires that are living in there? We all have a soul that wants to go on the road trip and it wants to drive. So let's make a commitment. Let's step beyond our fears this summer. Let's cheer each other on as we try new things and follow our curiosity out of our routines and our ruts. And let's witness each other, allowing our souls to steer for a little bit. I want to close with a quote from Amelia Earhart, someone who rose above societal and personal limitations for sure, quite famously. She said, "The most difficult thing is the decision to act. The rest is merely tenacity. The fears are paper tigers. You can do anything you decide to do. You can act to change and control your life, and the procedure, the process, is its own reward." Here's to making a decision to act, to slaying our personal paper tigers and finding fresh belief in ourselves, to decide to do the things to create some soul magic. We're going to each move beyond function all the way to beauty, and so it is.
So it is.